It was a piece of skin. That's all that was left when everything was over. It was scaled and brightly colored. It was mostly red with spots of yellow and blue. The scales were almost iridescent under direct sunlight. It was maybe 3 inches long and 2 across. Not much, but enough to bring in the US government and get us all escorted out of there like we were criminals. There were 3 of us who, after several useless calls to the local authorities, decided to take matters into our own hands and take care of whatever the thing was that had been attacking old Emily's house at night. Emily must have been in her 90s at least, and her house was older than she was. It was an old, dilapidated thing out in the middle of the forest, miles away from anyone. She didn't have a whole lot of money and basically let the house fall apart. A few of the local tradesmen would come out and fix things for her for free. I was one of them. I guess most of us pitied her. She didn't have any family left in the area. No children, no husband. So we helped her out as much as we were able. Every time I went there to fix her electric, she would try to pay me with food. I would try to decline, knowing that she didn't have much food herself, but no matter what I said, she always sent me home with a carton of eggs from her chickens. I think it was the chickens that brought the creature to her land. It was hungry, and they were an easy meal. Emily had lost half a dozen chickens before she started locking them in at night, and that made the creature mad. It started attacking her home, leaving claw marks on the doors and windows. It must have been intelligent because it recognized the way in, but it was angry it couldn't get there. She said one night that it tried to open the door by jiggling the handle. At first, she thought it was just a rogue animal, but when that happened, she decided it must be a person. So she called the police. The police came out and searched the property. They didn't find a thing pointing to the identity of the culprit. There were scratch marks on the door and the sides of the house, but nothing that indicated what it was. No footprints. Nothing. The police decided it must be a bear. They are dexterous with their paws, and a determined one could have jiggled the handle of Emily's door. The next time it happened, Emily called the game warden. They came out and did a search of the area looking for signs of the bear. Of course, they didn't find anything either. Over the next several months, Emily ended up calling both the police and the game warden at least 20 times. Neither of them would do anything for her. And then one night, the thing got inside the shed she kept her chickens and killed them all. Of course, the game warden came out after that, but he couldn't find a single sign of the creature that did it. I heard about what happened to Emily's chickens from another of the tradesmen who worked on her house. We decided to pitch in with another guy who worked for her sometimes and buy her new chickens. Chickens around here weren't too expensive, but we knew she probably couldn't afford them. All 3 of us went over there and delivered the chickens to her, and that's when we got the real story of what was going on. Emily told us to take the chickens back. She said they wouldn't be safe at her house. She said there was some kind of monster out there in the woods. We fixed up the chicken shed and told Emily to call us if there was any more activity, and we would come out and take care of it day or night. She thanked us for the chickens and we left. Just 2 nights later, I got a call from one of the tradesmen saying Emily's house was being attacked. I had the longest drive, so I got there last. The faces of my friends told me there was something else to this. They both looked terrified, and these aren't guys that scare easy. I asked what they found, and they said I wouldn't believe them, so they didn't bother explaining. They told me to load my gun because the creature fled into the forest, and we were going to hunt it down. I said my gun was already loaded, and we all got into a pickup truck and drove out to the edge of the trees. We had a spotlight with us, and my friend kept shining it up into the trees. I asked him why, and he said the creature could fly, so here I was, in the woods at night, certain I was about to have to shoot down an eagle or something else illegal to save Emily's chickens. They said they got a couple of rounds in it before I got there, but it was still able to fly away. Again, I asked what it was, but neither of them wanted to explain. We walked through the forest for maybe 7 or 8 minutes before we spotted something tucked away high in the trees. Its whole body reflected against the light. I couldn't get a good look at it from where I was standing on the ground, but I could see its massive wings. They were like bat wings, but with feathers at the ends. My buddy fired at it with a 12 gauge the moment he saw it. It took 2 hits that I could see and still managed to fly up out of the tree. I'm not sure how I can say this without sounding insane, but it was a dinosaur. That's the only way I can describe it. It flew right over my head and I shot it twice, one shot landing right in its neck and the thing dropped like a rock. We drubbed the carcass out of the woods and threw it in the back of the truck. It took all 3 of us to lift it. Its face was reptilian and covered in scales. Most of its body was red, but it had other colors accenting its face and limbs. Parts of its wings and tail were feathered. Its eyes looked like snake eyes. When it touched it, its skin was the texture of a basketball. I couldn't believe my eyes. Never in a million years did I think I'd ever see something like this. And I had killed it. Part of me wishes I hadn't, but this thing was trying to get in old Emily's house at night. I imagine if it ever succeeded, it could have easily killed her. The police were at Emily's door when we got back. They got called out by a neighbor who heard the shooting. We showed them the creature in the bed of the truck and both officers nearly fainted. No one had anything explanation. It took about 2 hours for someone from the government to arrive. They hauled the creature out under a black tarp and loaded it onto a military vehicle. They tried to claim it was a bird that escaped from a local zoo and was very sick, which is why it lost most of its feathers. None of us believed them, but that was the story they gave. It made me wonder if maybe they created it in a lab somewhere. Of course, we would never get any answers out of them, so I didn't ask. We were all escorted off the property. They booked Emily a hotel to stay in for the rest of the night while they did whatever it was that they were going to do. Government cars all followed us home and stayed outside our houses until the early morning hours. No doubt our phone lines were tapped, so we knew we couldn't talk to anyone about it. It wasn't until the next time I ran into one of the tradesmen on another job that I learned he found a piece of the creature's skin left in the back of the truck. He pulled it out and showed it to me. He wanted to send it somewhere for DNA testing, but he knew Big Brother would probably find out, so he couldn't risk it. This happened about 15 years ago now. I was right around 9 or 10 years old. I was camping with my family in eastern Kentucky. We would go camping together a couple of times each summer when the weather permitted. One of the campgrounds we would go to was on the back side of the mountains. I never liked that particular campground very much. Since we were on the eastern side of the mountains, sunset would come on early and then all of a sudden it was pitch black out. As a kid, this meant less time to run around the woods with my siblings. My parents were always very strict about having us back at the tent by dark. I can't remember the name of the park offhand. I do remember that all the campsites were hike-in only, meaning we had to park the car at one of the lots inside the park and carry all our camping gear a few miles down the trail to the campgrounds. There were vault toilets at the campgrounds, but no showers or running water, and definitely no electricity, so we had to carry in everything. The hike to the site felt unnecessarily long and grueling to me, but I was only a kid at the time. I'm sure it wasn't more than a couple of miles from the parking lot. We got there on a Friday night after my parents both got home from work, and we planned to stay until Sunday afternoon. Nothing nefarious happened the first night, but I distinctly remember having a strange feeling around the campground. There was a change in the atmosphere from the last time we were there. You know how you can feel a storm coming on before it hits? It was like that, but it wasn't a storm. It was like I could just feel that there was something evil out there in the hills. The days were seemingly normal. Nothing odd happened, but then the sun went down. I'm certain it was out there on Friday when we got to the campground, but it moved in Saturday after nightfall. We were all sitting around the fire eating dinner when a sound came ringing out of the woods. It was metallic in nature. It sounded like someone was banging against a pan or something, and then it transitioned into a metallic scraping sound. My dad took a walk around the campground. There were only 3 other people there, and they all heard the sound too. It wasn't coming from anywhere in the campground, it was coming from the forest. My parents told us to stay close to the campsite for the rest of the night. They thought there was another person out there in the woods, and you really never know with people like that. There have been stories about campers being attacked by crazy people before. I know it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. However, this situation wouldn't be so easily explained. We heard the metallic sound a couple more times before we eventually went to bed. I could tell my parents were on edge, and they made us promise to stay inside our tent until morning. I should mention here that whenever we went camping, my parents would have their own tent, and my sisters and I would sleep in a separate tent. Our tent was actually bigger than theirs, so we never complained. Plus, we liked the extra freedom we thought we had, even though our tents were only about 8 feet apart. My youngest sister woke me up at around 3 o'clock in the morning, saying there was someone outside our tent. I told her it was probably one of our parents checking on us, but she said no. She said it was crawling on the ground. The wall of the tent was a little bit see-through, but not enough that you could get a good idea of what was happening outside. The moon that night was full, but it still wasn't enough light to be able to see through the tent wall. Still, I knew my sister wasn't lying. I asked if it was a person, and she said yes, but there was something wrong with it. I remember she used the word it. She didn't say them, she said it. I stayed up with her for maybe 30 minutes before she fell back asleep. I realized that I really needed to go to the bathroom. It would be morning in a couple of hours, but I didn't think I could hold it. I probably should have woken up my other sister and made her come with me, but the toilet was only about 40 feet from our tent, so I grabbed the flashlight and headed out into the darkness. I looked around for signs of the person my sister thought she saw, but I didn't see any. I made it to the toilet without any incident, but on my way back, I felt that same feeling as I did on Friday night. Like there was a storm coming. And then I heard a click. It was coming from the forest, not too far from where I was standing. It was an unnatural sound that made me pause for a moment. Looking back, that is exactly what it wanted. The sounds it makes. It wants to confuse you. It wants you to stop and try to figure it out. It wants you to stay there. I knew I needed to get back to the tent. I didn't want to turn and run in case that made whatever was out there want to chase me, so I calmly turned around and began to walk away. It was then that I heard my name being called from the forest. It almost sounded like my mother's voice, but there was something off about it. And here's the weird part. It was my full name. No one in my family ever calls me that, even if I get in trouble. I always go by my nickname. Always. I turned back around to face the forest, and I saw 2 glowing eyes staring back at me. I couldn't see what they belonged to, but I knew it was something evil. I don't know how it knew my name, but I knew it was trying to keep me there. This time I ran. It didn't take me long to reach the tent, and it didn't appear that the creature attempted to follow me. I didn't get out of the tent until well past morning. I ended up telling my parents what happened on the car ride home. I thought they would be mad at me for leaving the tent after dark, but they were quiet. I don't know if they knew something more about what was out there than I did, but I was afraid to ask. They never took us back to that campground again. I was cleaning out my grandfather's house after his passing when I found a journal from his grandfather detailing some of his experiences searching for gold up in the northern Yukon. The binding of the journal had all but failed, and the pages were extremely fragile, but it could still be read for the most part. I was the family history nerd, so the journal was given to me, and reading it was quite the wild ride. I felt like a kid again, sitting by a fireside listening to my grandpa's wild stories. He always used to tell these crazy tales about his father and his grandfather. I thought they were mostly fiction, or at the very least, heavily embellished, but reading the journal made me rethink everything I ever knew. The journal started out normal enough. He was talking about his journey to reach the north of Canada. It was the late 1800s. There were no roads in, so they had to go up the river. Most of the entries were about the weather and the landscape. He said it was like nothing he had ever seen back home. The mountains engulfed the horizon line. It was a barren, lonely, wild place. Navigating the river was a challenge, and it wasn't unheard of to lose people on the journey there and back. I found the journey fascinating, but that isn't the reason I wrote into your channel. About halfway through the journal, he starts talking about the creatures they found up there in the north, creatures that should have died out thousands of years ago. The first time he mentioned it was August 23rd, 1883. The group he was traveling with made their way into a local village. He said that it wasn't uncommon to find frozen mammoth carcasses in the melting ice, and that the locals would harvest the ivory to sell, and that finding a mammoth was almost as good as finding gold. He was walking around the village when he saw some mammoth tusks sitting alongside a group of houses. He took a closer look at them. He had never mammoth tusks before. He said they were huge, and that the animal they once belonged to must have been gargantuan. He then said one pair of tusks in particular had bright red blood running down them, as if the animal had just been killed moments ago. He asked around the village about the tusks with the blood, but no one would talk. He thought their hesitance to speak to him might be because he was an outsider, but he felt like they were hiding something. Maybe they didn't want any more people to know where they were taking these creatures out of the ice. The next time the mammoths came up in the journal was in the spring of the following year. He met another prospector who had a coat of the most thick brown fur he'd ever seen in his life. He asked the man about the coat. The man laughed and said it was mammoth hide and that the natives up there hunt them. My great-grandfather didn't believe him. Mammoths had gone extinct thousands of years ago, but the man said no, they hadn't. The Yukon's the perfect place for them. Cold, remote, nearly inaccessible to humans. In the journal entry, my great-grandfather thought about the idea of living mammoths. He said Prospector was right, that the environment was perfect for them, but still, he had a hard time believing such an animal was still walking among humans after all these years. It was the following summer that made him believe. June 30th, 1885. My great-grandfather was traveling with a different group. They were going further north, hoping to find an area that hadn't already been picked clean. He had heard some stories of men up there finding nuggets of gold lying along the river rock near their campsites. They were warned by some local villagers before they left. They told the men to stay south of the river. They said there were evil spirits north of the water that were extremely dangerous. No one in the party believed in such things, so they didn't heed the warning. It was fairly common for prospectors to tell ghost stories to try to keep others away from their strikes. They figured the natives were doing the same thing. So they went north of the river. My great-grandfather said the landscape up there was incredible, almost as if he had stepped into another world. The mountains were bigger, the trees were bigger, even the plants were bigger up there. There were areas at the foothills of the mountains that were fed by geothermal springs. The plant life there was like nothing else he had seen in the Yukon. They saw wolves and bears out there that were double their normal size. One member of the party shot one of the wolves and measured its pelt at 12 feet long. My great-grandfather mentioned that the wildlife were very wary of humans, and it was rare to see one up close unless it was hungry. That's how they got the wolf. It was a lone wolf without a pack, looking for an easy meal. On the 30th of June, they were camping along the edge of the river. It was just before dawn when my great-grandfather heard rustling in the foliage nearby. He poked his head out of the tent and saw a herd of woolly mammoth going to the river to drink. He said they were about the size of an elephant, and they were able to move through the grass and trees almost silently. The only reason he even heard them was because one of the creatures was brushing its tusks against the ground. My great-grandfather was in disbelief. At first, he thought he must be having a dream, but the other members of the party saw them too. And then they realized why the natives didn't want them up there. They were trying to protect the animals. My great-grandfather thought that it was likely there weren't many of these creatures left. The party was in agreement that they should make their way south of the river and stay there. No one knew if they were aggressive or not, and no one in the party wanted to have their camp near them if they were. Everyone in the party had a gun for bear defense, but whether their guns could take down a mammoth was not something they wanted to find out. Now, my great-grandfather has been gone quite a while, so I can't ask him if the stories are true or not, but that's what he wrote. I can't imagine him making such a detailed account of everything else just to throw a fake story about mammoths in there. I did a little bit of research after I read his journal and found that there were other tales of living mammoths up there around the same time period. So maybe there is some truth there after all? I wish I had the type of story that comes with a real shocking encounter. I wish I had a clever hook or some great reveal to build up to. That's the problem with my story, understand? Anytime I tell it, people seem to lose interest in the details. Details are all I've got. I don't have the body of the thing that terrorized my land 10 years ago, and I didn't see it up close. I only the effects it had on my land and my livestock. Those things I paid attention to very closely. They were my livelihood, and this thing came out to destroy them. What I found first, and this separates my experience from so many others, was what looked like a crop circle. The edge of my property is dominated by fields of tall grass. Maintenance out there isn't as consistent as it should be. I visited the field on this particular day and found a large pattern pressed flat in its center. It looked like a meteor had landed in the blade and the impact had blown them all down. That didn't explain the basket weave pattern in the tall grass, but the sighting wasn't enough to shake me from my routine. I figured it was a weather anomaly. Then the problems began. I had a calf go missing. They were signs of a struggle, and I followed them across my property from the relative safety of my ATV. The trail led me back to the indentation upon my field. My calf had been dragged back to the crop circle and then just vanished. That, as you can imagine, was enough to shake me from my routine. We would later find the animal's remains, emptied of anything that had once given it life. The adult cows started to show signs of anemia. They were getting lethargic. They seemed to be thinner by the day. My usual vet couldn't explain their condition. The weight loss was too rapid, and there were too few symptoms beyond the lethargy to suggest that something viral was taking place. What we found instead of answers were 3 puncture wounds in a triangle pattern at the base of the cows' necks. The puncture marks were in the same place on every member of the herd. The corners of the triangles were equidistant in every case. Whatever it was biting or stabbing my livestock, it was doing so with a methodical consistency. I thought I was being sabotaged. It sounds ridiculous now, but I thought maybe it was a man behind my troubles. Nothing else made sense to me at the time. I couldn't fathom the scope of what I was dealing with. I couldn't imagine that something truly horrible had arrived on my land. If you learned that was true, would you even know where to begin? I sure didn't. I added electric barricades and camera systems, thinking they would be enough to deter any intruders from pushing too far into my land. It would certainly keep them away from the cows, or so I believed. When another one disappeared, this time one of the fully grown females, I knew I was dealing with something more than sabotage. There were no drag marks this time. There was no path my cow could have taken to escape, and the camera caught nothing. No intruders on the perimeter. Nothing. I turned them inward. What choice did I have? I pointed the security system into the farm instead of away from it. My only hope was that the invader we were dealing with was lurking somewhere on my property. That would explain why I didn't need to interact with the electric fence. At least if I could catch it on camera and identify it, I could solve the problem. I could save my way of life. What I saw was a creature materialize out of the air. Others who have seen the footage suggest that it was just concealed by the environment, but I know that can't be true. It wasn't there, and then it was Something walking on 4 legs stepped out of the empty space in the air. 1 leg at a time, it pulled itself forward. The monster was the size of a wolf, massive and certainly intimidating. I could see at once why my livestock didn't stand a chance against it. Its head was long like a canine's, too. Its hair only grew in patches and its skin was blistered, like it had rolled around on hot embers and burned away the majority of its fur. I'd say it was a sick dog if it wasn't for what happened next. A long cylindrical tongue slid out of its maw. It must have stretched over a foot long. The barbed end of it snapped onto the back of my cow's neck. It crawled onto its shoulders like it was ready to take the animal for a drive. The cow itself seemed complacent, maybe lulled into obedience by whatever was dripping from the end of the creature's tongue. Looking at the footage, I couldn't help but think of a mosquito drinking from the skin on my forearms. Was that what I was seeing? Was this creature drinking my animals dry? As quickly as it had appeared, it soon vanished. This time, the cow disappeared with it, as if its image was blown away by the wind. This has been explained to me as a technical error. Maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe the creature moves in a way that the technology just couldn't pick up. I don't know. I invited a few of my friends out that night. We waited up with shotguns and rifles. They weren't going to let me be run into the ground by some monster, even if they didn't believe in it themselves. For whatever reason, the creature didn't come back. Maybe it sensed the danger. Maybe it was just full. If that's the case, what do I do when it gets hungry again? I'm about 50 years old and been living in California for about 5 years now. I always used to be a skeptic by nature. I was a firm believer of science and frankly just listening to someone tell a paranormal story was something I couldn't bear. Life is crazy though. You never know what can happen to you. I am not a skeptic anymore. In fact, the paranormal, supernatural, whatever you want to call it, has taken over my life. There are some overwhelmingly powerful, mysterious, and dark forces in the world we live in. When I first moved down here to California, I went camping to get away from it all for a night and just be alone with nature. I was reading a self-help book at the time that told me I should take time to be alone with my thoughts. I didn't take the most virtuous path in my life, to be honest, but moving to California was my way of doing a 180 in my life and getting on the right track. I was listening to lectures, going on retreats, and reading every self-help book I could get my hands on. The first couple of days were beautiful. It was just me. I did some meditating, tai chi, yoga, and was beginning to shed my skin of the past. I had set up my tent in a clearing, surrounded by trees, and the nearest town was a few miles away. One night, I was sitting outside my tent and enjoying a book by the fire. All of a sudden, I hear the sound of children laughing and playing in the woods nearby. Keep in mind, I wasn't planning on seeing another soul, so I made sure the location I chose was miles away from anybody else. The children started laughing and playing even louder, and now I could hear the faint sound of children's music. It sounded like it was coming from a music box. It was strange and unnerving, and I kept shouting, "Hello! Hello!" Finally, I got up to investigate and shone my flashlight in the direction of the noise. I didn't see anything, but the children's noises and the music started getting louder and louder. It was really starting to freak me out, and I went deeper into the woods to figure out what the hell was going on. For a while, I didn't see anything, but then the sounds and the music started coming from multiple directions. Then in the distance, I noticed a pair of strange, glowing eyes staring back at me. They were yellowish green and had an unnatural shine to them. They were glowing in a way that really irritated my eyes. I was in absolute shock and couldn't believe what was going on. The eyes were very high up, so I had no idea what kind of creature I could be dealing with. The sounds kept getting louder and louder to the point I was getting a headache. I had to confront whatever this thing was. I ran towards the eyes, screaming and telling it to stop. The closer I got to the glowing eyes, the further into the woods they went. Then all of a sudden, the music and the children's laughter stopped, and the eyes disappeared. I was now deep in the woods, completely alone, and was shining my flashlight in every direction trying to find whatever I was dealing with. Then I heard an awful low growl that sounded freaking demonic. This made me lose it. I took off back towards the tent. I grabbed my keys, left all my stuff, climbed in my truck, and took off down the road. I saw the eyes glowing in the distance again, and when I turned my high beams on, I saw a creature, almost skeletal, on all fours with the most evil sneer on its face. It was the most demented thing I've ever seen in my life. Its back almost looked like it was broken in half, and it was angled downwards. It was the most unnatural, creepiest, horrifying thing I've ever witnessed. It followed me with its glowing eyes as I sped past it, and I was in shock the whole way home. Over the next few days, I was unable to shake off the fear that had taken hold of me. I started experiencing nightmares and hearing strange noises in my home. I even saw the creature lurking outside my window, but when I went out to investigate, it was gone. I couldn't sleep, eat, or think straight. I was always on edge and scared that the creature would come for me. I obsessively researched paranormal entities online, and that's when I first discovered a creature called the Skinwalker. It perfectly matched what I was seeing, and it had the ability to shape-shift and conjure up sounds to lure its prey. One night, as I was driving home from work, I saw the creature standing in the middle of the road. I swerved to avoid it, and I crashed my car into a tree. Thankfully, I wasn't seriously injured, but the incident left me shaking. After the car accident, I couldn't shake off the feeling that the Skinwalker was following me wherever I went. I saw it lurking in the shadows on my way to work. I caught glimpses of it darting behind me in my rearview mirror while driving, and I even felt its presence in my closet when I was getting dressed in the morning. But the worst part was the dreams. Every night I dreamt of the Skinwalker, taunting me and tormenting me with its presence. I would try to fight back, but my attempts were always futile. It would disappear, only to reappear again in the next dream, haunting me relentlessly. As the days went by, my panic grew stronger. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I couldn't focus at work, I couldn't sleep at night, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that the Skinwalker was always lurking just out of sight. I tried everything to get rid of it. I smudged my house with sage. I visited a psychic. I went to a psychiatrist, and I even sought out a shaman for help. But nothing worked. The Skinwalker remained a constant presence in my life, haunting me at every turn. In the end, I realized that I had to accept that I might never be able to get rid of the Skinwalker. It had become a part of me, and I had to learn to live with it. But even as I came to this realization, the panic never truly left me, and I still catch myself glancing over my shoulder, always on the lookout for that eerie, otherworldly presence. Look! If it wasn't scientifically explainable, I wasn't interested. I never believed in monsters or any of that crap. I was a logical man with a rational mind. That all changed when I saw it. I was sitting on my porch in South Carolina enjoying a nice cold beer when I saw it with my own eyes. At first I thought it was a weird cloud formation, but as I looked closer, I realized it was something else entirely. I'm just an average guy with a wife and kids. I work a 9-to-5 job, and I'm not particularly interested in anything paranormal. I never gave it much thought until I saw this freaking thing. I tried to ignore it at first, but it was too mesmerizing to look away. I stared at it for what felt like hours, trying to figure out what it was. In the sky was a gigantic creature that twisted and turned, its long, slender body writhing around and snaking through the air. Its scales glinted brightly, and I could see its eyes from way down on the ground. To say the least, I was in shock. Its wings were huge and flapping around, making a huge whooshing sound. The thing looked like it was on the hunt, searching for something. What it was, who knows? But I'm glad it wasn't me. After seeing the winged snake creature in the sky, I spent every waking moment researching what it could have been. I watched videos of UFO sightings, read articles about alien encounters, and even researched the possibility of dragons. But nothing quite matched the creature I saw. It wasn't until I stumbled upon accounts of sky serpents that I realized that's the only thing it could have been. As I dug deeper into sky serpent sightings, I found that many people had reported seeing similar creatures. I even found some recent sightings that had been reported in the same area where I saw the sky serpent. It made me wonder if there was something more to it. I found a group of people online who had also witnessed sky serpents and joined their online forum to share our stories and experiences. You gotta be careful online, man. Some of those people are nutbags, but these are good people. They were very helpful in providing me with more information and resources to better understand what I had seen. The whole me being a rational thinking person thing ceased once I had this experience. The truth is, we have no idea what other strange creatures and mysteries are out there that we know nothing about. Some of these people online tell stories of where the sky serpents attacked them, their loved ones, their livestock, etc. I only saw it from far away. I can't imagine a sky serpent trying to eat me. Talk about traumatizing. My heart truly goes out to people. We have no idea what some people go through, and then have to go on through life as if nothing happened. My research showed me that sky serpents had been reported all throughout history. Some people even believe they could be related to ancient sea creatures like plesiosaurs or mosasaurs. Fascinating stuff. After researching extensively, I finally came to accept that what I saw could have only been a sky serpent. All other suspicions were gone. I swear on my children's lives that what I saw was a sky serpent. It was an experience that shook me to my core and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the world. I couldn't believe that such a creature existed, but the evidence was overwhelming. I found reports of sky serpent sightings that dated back centuries. It seemed that people had been encountering these creatures for as long as humans had been walking the earth. Crazy stuff, man. After coming to terms with what I had seen, I decided to share my experience with others. I knew that there would be skeptics, but I also knew that there were people out there who had seen similar things and were looking for answers. Oh my God. Looking back on my experience, I realize how small and insignificant I am in the grand scheme of things. There are still so many mysteries in the world that we have yet to uncover, and I am grateful to have had this experience that has opened my eyes to the possibility of the unknown. I cannot emphasize enough how much this experience has affected every aspect of my life and the way that I think. The image of that sky serpent is forever etched in my mind, and it is something that I will never forget and will look at as a changing point in my life. I'm a more well-rounded, open-minded, empathetic, and interesting person now. I hear how ridiculous people sound now when they say that there's no such thing as Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. How could you know? It has opened my eyes to the possibility that there are so many other strange and unexplained phenomena out there just waiting to be discovered. Who knows what else is out there in the great unknown, just beyond the reaches of our understanding. I am now constantly on the lookout for any signs of the unusual, and my curiosity has been piqued in a way that I never could have imagined. This experience has left me with a profound sense of wonder and excitement for what else may be out there, just waiting to be explored. My investigation into sky serpents led me down a path of discovery that I never could have imagined. I connected with people from all over the world who had had similar experiences, and I learned so much about the history of these creatures. The sky serpent sighting had a profound impact on me, and it made me realize that there is still so much to be explored and discovered in this world. I was a scoutmaster for 10 years. I'm not sure if that's something people care about anymore, but it's true. That was a big chapter of my life. It might be dorky or unflattering for me to admit, but I had a lot of fond memories from those times. The bond you develop with your peers, your pupils, and the world around you. Nothing can replace that. Retirement suits me, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I do miss it. Kids, at least until a certain age, always smiled their brightest when they were in the Scouts. Working with them made them feel respected, capable, and brave. Those are the feelings we all want, aren't they? Those feelings are the reasons why I never told any of my Scouts this story. I didn't want them to know that our little organization, just like any other, was absolutely fragile when compared to the strength of nature itself. There's an island in the Northeast where we'd take graduating Scouts for one final hike before sending them off on their life journeys. Prior to those big hikes, Scoutmasters like myself would be asked to visit the island. We'd check for dangers, clean up any debris left behind by adventurous partygoers, and generally prepare the island for visitors. That was my assignment on the week I met it. Aside from snakes, raccoons, and the occasional fox, the island we visited was never dense with predators. That was the belief, of course, right up until my encounter. I was packing up for the night. I was lighting the oil lamps, heating a kettle in the kitchen, and changing out of the beige uniform that had defined my recent years. Then I heard something like thunder. I knew where it came from. The shore. That was where my boat was docked. I rushed outside to see what the noise could have been. I expected to see an accident of some kind. I thought there'd be another boat, splintered up against the ridge that marked the western edge of the beach. Instead, I found my own boat in pieces. Drag lines led from the place where I'd tied the vessel to the place where the boat was torn apart. Shards of wood poked out of the sand and created a path from the beach to the brush. Massive indentations followed the debris like footprints the size of tree trunks. I was in awe. I couldn't believe it. There was no storm overhead that could have wrecked my boat. There were no other people here, no saboteurs lurking in the woods. If they had arrived, I'd see their own vessel floating in the water. I followed the tracks with my flashlight, finding a hobbled sense of comfort in the memory of the radio that sat in pristine condition back at the cabin. Even if I didn't have a way off of the island myself, I could easily call for help. The tracks got harder to follow as they began to weave through the trees. Whatever I was chasing, it appears that the owner of those footprints had turned sideways in order to navigate the forestry. It looked as though it was strafing, walking shoulder first. Was it so big that it couldn't fit in the woods naturally? If that was the case, why couldn't I see it yet? Why couldn't I hear it? Thankfully, my other senses came to the rescue. I smelled it before anything else. Deep and wet and heavy, it smelled like the edge of the water line. It smelled sour, salty. It burned my nose like I was breathing in the water itself. I almost choked. I only stayed quiet because my eyes jumped to the source of the odor. My gaze leapt ahead of me, and that's when I saw it. Two massive eyes the size of oranges, staring at me. The beam of my flashlight shined in its wet irises. Its head was twice the size of my own. Its mouth stretched wide, similar to a toad or a catfish, but its skin and its body looked human. Its flesh was a tender pink, scabbed and scarred by the wilderness. It looked human, except for its massive size. Its massive frame forced it to lean forward. The creature's knuckles sunk into the dirt. As I watched it, it stepped closer. Its gait was slow and cautious. I saw that its feet were short, stunted like a hoof. And when it opened its mouth, it bellowed. It droned. Its cries shuddered out from its chest. My legs and my bones shook immediately. All I could do was turn and run. I don't remember when, but at some point I dropped my flashlight. I ran in the dark. I knew where to go. I knew where the cabin was. I knew where the radio was. But the beast wasn't gone. I heard its footfalls like hammer blows behind me, slamming into the earth like every branch was a nail that needed stomped flat. The monster was chasing me. I was thankful for its massive stature. It was too big to run at its full speed, I'm sure. I don't know how it got to that island, but I'm sure in hindsight that it wasn't the monster's home. I heard its shoulders thudding into the trees. I heard the birds scatter and shriek overhead. Thud, thud, thud. With every slam, I thought the next deafening impact would be the sound of its giant hand slapping against my back. I imagined its fists raining down on me. But then, suddenly, I was home. I was in the cabin. I was locking the door and looking through the window, relieved that there was no sign of a creature. I reached for the radio, pleaded for help, and got out of there as soon as I could. No one believed what I saw, but they did cancel that hike. Our organization never returned to the island, and I promised never to tell this story. It's frightening, isn't it? It's frightening to know that there might be things lurking out there that none of us expect to find. But the older I get, the more I've reconsidered. Maybe this story can be useful. What do you think? If we know it's out there, can we prepare for it? Or should we stop going out there at all? I want to share with you an experience that happened to me and my dog, Sparkles, one night while we were out for a walk. I am not a young woman, though my mind is still sharp and have lived in this town for most of my life. I have walked the same route with Sparkles for years, and it has always been peaceful and uneventful. However, one night, something happened that changed my perception of the world around me. I had never been a believer in the paranormal. I thought those kinds of things only happened in movies and books. But what I saw that night made me a believer. It was a warm summer night, and Sparkles and I were out for our usual walk. We lived in a quiet suburban area, and our neighborhood was always peaceful at night. However, as we walked, I started to feel uneasy. Sparkles, who is normally very relaxed on our walks, was growling and barking at something I couldn't see. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but Sparkles was acting as if something was there. I have always been an animal lover and have owned dogs my whole life. I am retired now and spend most of my time with Sparkles. We have a close bond and I cherish our time together. I've never experienced anything like what happened that night, and it has left me very uneasy. As we continued walking, I saw something moving in the distance. At first, I thought it was a stray dog, but as we got closer, I realized it was something far more sinister. It was a massive, black dog-like creature with burning red eyes and thick, matted fur. It was larger than any dog I had ever seen, and my mother used to breed Great Danes. It was staring right at us. I stopped in my tracks, and Sparkles barked louder and louder. We both stood there as the creature approached us, and I had never been so scared. It was so close that I could feel its breath on my face. I could see its teeth, and they were long, yellow, and sharp. The beast started to circle us, and it had a deep, bellowing growl. I held on to Sparkles' leash, trying to keep her as close to me as possible. It seemed to be toying with us, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a truly terrifying experience, and I thought it might be the end for me and Sparkles. Suddenly, I heard a group of people calling out to me. They were a couple of teenagers who were out for a walk. They had seen the awful creature and were trying to help us. They yelled and ran at the creature and threw rocks in its direction. Thankfully, this worked, and the creature ran away. I was shaking and couldn't believe what had just happened. Those nice kids helped me back to my house and sat me until I calmed down. I was afraid to go outside after that, and I couldn't sleep for days. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened and the fact that Sparkles and I had come so close to being attacked. The strange creature could have easily killed us. I felt lucky that we had escaped with our lives. I started to research what I had seen and came across something called a hellhound. I learned that they were supernatural beings that were often associated with death and the devil. It was a chilling discovery. I wanted to know more about the hellhound and why it had come after us. I did a lot of research on hellhounds and paranormal creatures in general. I learned that hellhounds were often seen as harbingers of death, and that their appearance could be a warning of imminent danger. The experts I spoke to were intrigued by my encounter and asked me to describe the hellhound in detail. They seemed to think that it was a unique encounter, and they asked me to keep them updated if I had any more sightings. I also learned that hellhounds were said to have a connection to the supernatural and that they were often seen as guardians of the underworld. I couldn't believe that I had come face to face with such a creature. As I delved deeper into my research, I found out that there had been other sightings of hellhounds in the area. Some people claimed to have seen them lurking around graveyards and cemeteries. I was amazed to learn that I wasn't alone in my encounter and that other people had seen these creatures too. I am so grateful that I had Sparkles with me that night. She may have saved our lives by alerting me to the hellhound's presence. I am also grateful for my new young friends who helped us, and for the experts who helped me understand what had happened. The encounter has left me with a deep sense of awe and wonder at the mysteries of the universe. I have continued my research into the paranormal and have even started journaling about my experiences. I have found a new passion for the unknown and the supernatural. As strange as it may sound, I am grateful for what happened that night, as it has opened up a whole new world for me. I now know there are things out there that we cannot explain that go beyond our understanding. I am convinced that Sparkles may have been growling at the hellhound all along and that she had sensed its presence long before I did. I feel lucky to have seen something so rare and unusual, and I am much more open-minded now. Thank you for allowing me to share my story. I hope it will inspire others to be more aware of the world around them and always be on the lookout for the unexpected. Life is full of surprises, and we never know what we might encounter. It is up to us to be prepared and to stay curious. Thank you again for time, Donovan. If not for the hellhound, I would have never had gotten into listening to your stories. I have a story even I don't believe in. Do you get that? Do you have one of those stories where maybe you lived it but it still doesn't sound real? I guess that makes it seem like I'm about to talk about something terrible. Either terrible or miraculous, right? Why else would the story be so inconceivable? I'm not sure any of that is true. I don't think I encountered anything that was purely good or purely evil. But I did have an encounter. Maybe you can tell me what to make of it. I was fishing in the early spring. Fishing's about the only thing I have to pass the time anymore. It's been that way ever since my stint with the army came to an end. It's enough for me, though. A pole, a stiff drink, a book, and maybe my dog as company. It doesn't get much better than that. Lucky for everyone, I didn't bring my dog the day this happened. I was, however, distracted from my fishing line with my eyes glued to the pages of a wartime biography. When the splashing hit my ears, my eyes jumped from the ink on the page to the ripples in the water. I thought my hook had snagged something. The water wasn't particularly deep here, so a thrashing fish could kick up quite the storm. Instead, I saw a stone sinking to the bottom of the running water. Then another one hit just beside it. I yelled and hopped to my feet. Whoever was on the opposite side of the stream was ruining my chances at catching anything worthwhile. I thought it would be a kid, or maybe someone who held their liquor a little less efficiently than me. What I saw instead was a beast. I saw it lifting a third stone, larger than my head, with both hands wrapped around its curved sides. The rock dangled between its legs like the creature was caught mid-deadlift. It dropped the stone and straightened its back. Only then did I realize that it was close to 7 foot tall. Only then did it dawn on me that the beast I was staring at was standing upright. It wasn't supposed to do that, right? Bears didn't do that, not for prolonged periods of time and certainly not so naturally. Did apes do that? My brain was busy trying to rationalize the things my eyes were taking in. Tall, as thick as the trees around it, covered in rippling muscle that was obscured only by short reddish hair. Its face was almost human. Maybe that's why it was so difficult to quantify. My brain was trying to recognize the beast as kin, but it wasn't. It wasn't the same as me or as any person on this planet. It was different, stronger. I knew that by the size of the stones it was tossing. Taller, certainly. Meaner. I didn't know for a few more seconds. Suddenly, it came barreling across the stream. The water barely reached its shins. I turned to run, taking only a small knife with me. I heard the beast get tangled in the fishing line that had drifted across the flowing water. I heard it roar like something from Jurassic Park. Then my fishing rod appeared just a few feet to my left, lancing the ground like a javelin. It easily could have been my back it sunk into. Had the beast missed? Was it just threatening me? I didn't plan to find out, so I kept running. I heard its feet leave the water but continued slamming across the dry ground. It was chasing me all right, with no intention of slowing down or forgiving me for my apparent trespassing. I hoped I could outrun it. I hoped it would be too big to nimbly cut through the trees. When I started to feel its breath on my neck, I knew that I was wrong. I only had one way out, or so I thought. I turned on my heel, letting my back crash into the base of a tree, and I pointed my knife out toward it. I was going to fight the creature for my right to leave. It was too late for that. Its hands were tougher than coiled vines. When it swatted my wrist, I felt the bones crumple. The knife fell from my hand and the creature roared at me, this time so loudly that I felt its voice booming into my skull. I felt my brain rattle. For a moment, the world was so loud that I was sure death was coming. I thought I'd be deaf, then blind, then gone completely. I expected those mighty hands to strike my head next, maybe my chest. I closed my eyes, grit my teeth, and waited for the end. When the roaring stopped, I didn't dare open them. I didn't open them even as I heard the creature slowly walking away. I thought it was a trick. I was still convinced that it was too late. I don't know how long it took, but when I opened my eyes, the sun had gone down and the beast had disappeared. I was alone all of a sudden. My wrist was swollen. I left my knife in the dirt and got out of there as quickly as I could. I lied at the hospital, describing some accident that led to my injury. They didn't believe me, but it was easier to swallow than the truth. They sent me home with a bottle of painkillers, a fresh cast, and a head full of questions. You must understand, I don't believe in what I saw. I don't believe that it could have struck me in such a real way that my bones would break. Yet here I am. I have the X-rays to prove that this happened. Why then is it so hard for me to come to terms with? What's it called when your reality is too bizarre to believe in anymore? That's the reality I'm living in. I hope you never have to wake up. I've always been fascinated by the unexplained, and as a wildlife photographer, I've had my fair share of strange encounters in the wild. But when I received an anonymous tip about bizarre occurrences near an abandoned logging camp deep in the forest, I couldn't resist the opportunity to investigate. The informant claimed that people who ventured near the camp had reported seeing a large, muscular creature with a canine-like face and hearing guttural growls and howls coming from the surrounding woods. The description was eerily similar to that of the legendary Dogman, a creature I'd heard of but never actually believed to be real. Despite the potential danger, I felt a mix of excitement and fear as I prepared for my journey. Equipped with my trusty camera, a backpack filled with essentials, and a healthy dose of skepticism, I set off into the forest in search of the abandoned logging camp. As I ventured deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in the pit of my stomach. It was as if the forest itself was warning me to turn back, but my curiosity was too strong to ignore. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches twisting and reaching like gnarled, skeletal fingers. The further I traveled, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a terrible mistake. But it was too late to turn back now, and as I approached the abandoned logging camp, my heart raced with anticipation. The sun was sinking lower in the sky as I finally reached the abandoned logging camp. It was eerily quiet, with only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves and the occasional creak of the decrepit wooden buildings. I began to explore the area, my camera at the ready, searching for any signs of the creature that had been reported. As I walked, I came across strange tracks in the soft ground, unlike anything I had seen before. They were large, almost like a wolf's paw print, but much bigger and with elongated claws. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that perhaps the stories were true. Continuing my exploration, I stumbled upon a grisly sight: several animal carcasses torn apart as if by a massive predator. Blood stained the ground and the smell of rotting meat filled the air. My heart pounded in my chest and I knew I was getting closer to the truth. It was then that I heard it, a guttural growl echoing through the trees, chilling me to the bone. The sun had nearly disappeared below the horizon, and the shadows lengthened, casting an eerie, haunting glow over the camp. As darkness enveloped the forest, I decided to set up a makeshift camp for the night inside one of the abandoned buildings. The howls and growls seemed to grow louder and closer, and my uneasiness grew with each passing minute. My hands trembled as I tried to set up my camera equipment, hoping to capture evidence of the mysterious creature. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, as if a pair of predatory eyes were fixed on me from the shadows. Suddenly, a large figure appeared at the edge of the clearing just beyond the beam of my flashlight. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it. A massive, muscular body with broad shoulders and a hulking chest, covered in dark, matted fur. Its legs were bent like a daub's, and its snout was long and broad, filled with sharp, gleaming teeth. This was the legendary Dogman, and it was staring right at me. As fear coursed through my veins, I knew that I couldn't stay in this place any longer. I had to escape. Without a second thought, I grabbed my camera and started running through the forest, my heart pounding in my chest. The Dogman let out a terrifying howl and began to chase me, its powerful legs propelling it through the underbrush with alarming speed. Branches whipped at my face and my lungs burned, but I couldn't afford to slow down. I could hear the creature's heavy breathing behind me, getting closer and closer with every step. In my panic, I stumbled upon a derelict building and darted inside, praying that it would offer some refuge. I hid behind a pile of rotting wood, struggling to catch my breath and stifle the sobs that threatened to escape. I could hear the Dogman outside, sniffing the air and searching for me. Its guttural growls echoed through the building, and I knew that it wouldn't be long before it found me. As the Dogman closed in on my hiding spot, I knew I had to do something to buy myself some time. Desperation and fear coursed through me as I fumbled with my camera, hoping to use the flash as a distraction. I could hear the creature's heavy footsteps approaching, and I knew I only had one shot at this. With trembling hands, I aimed my camera at the Dogman and pressed the shutter button, causing the flash to erupt in a blinding burst of light. The creature let out a pained growl and recoiled, momentarily stunned by the sudden brightness. I seized this opportunity, sprinting out of the building and back towards the entrance of the forest. My legs pumped furiously as I raced through the dark forest, fueled by adrenaline and the will to survive. The Dogman, disoriented by the camera flash, quickly recovered and resumed its pursuit. The guttural growls and snapping of branches behind me were a constant reminder that I was still being hunted and that the creature was determined not to let me go. Despite my exhaustion, I knew I couldn't afford to slow down. Every second counted, and my life depended on it. The path through the forest was treacherous, with gnarled roots and uneven ground threatening to trip me at every turn. I could feel the thorns and branches tearing at my clothes and skin, but the pain was nothing compared to the terror that drove me onward. The sound of the Dogman's heavy breathing and powerful strides seemed to be getting closer, and I knew that I couldn't keep this pace up for much longer. As I continued to sprint through the darkness, my mind raced, searching for any possible way to escape this nightmare. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of despair creeping in. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I knew that I had to keep moving. I had come this far, and I refused to give up without a fight. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I could see the faintest glimmer of light filtering through the trees ahead. The edge of the forest was in sight, and with it, the hope of safety. My heart soared at the sight, and I pushed myself to run even faster, despite the agony that racked my body. But the Dogman was relentless, and it was not about to give up its prey so easily. Its powerful legs propelled it even closer, and I could feel its hot, fetid breath on the back of my neck as it lunged for me. With one final burst of speed, I burst through the tree line, leaving the oppressive darkness of the forest behind. And just like that, the dogman stopped its pursuit. It hesitated at the edge of the woods, snarling and baring its teeth, but it didn't dare to follow me any further. The creature let out one last, chilling howl before disappearing back into the shadows, leaving me shaken, battered, and forever changed by my encounter with the legendary Dogman. This harrowing experience would remain etched in my memory, a reminder of the terrifying creatures that lurk in the depths of the wild and the thin line between life and death. My respect and awe for the unknown had only grown, and I knew that my days of searching for answers had only just begun. As an urban explorer, I had visited many abandoned locations, but none had intrigued me as much as the old subway station beneath the city. I had heard countless stories about the place, tales of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences. Despite the unnerving rumors, I couldn't resist the allure of uncovering the station's secrets for myself. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, I ventured into the dark, decaying subway station late one night. The air was damp and musty, and the eerie silence was broken only by the echoing sound of my footsteps. As I descended deeper into the station, I marveled at the graffiti-covered walls and the rusted train cars, remnants of a time long past. The further I ventured, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. I began to hear strange noises echoing through the tunnels. The distant, eerie clicking sounds and faint, rapid movement seemed to come from every direction. I tried to dismiss the noises as my imagination running wild, but I couldn't shake the growing feeling of unease. It was then that I encountered the creature. As I rounded a corner, my flashlight illuminated a pale, gaunt figure that moved quickly on all fours. Its large black eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and its open, gaping mouth revealed a darkness that sent chills down my spine. The creature let out a horrifying clicking sound, and I knew in that moment that I had to escape. I sprinted through the dark tunnels, my heart pounding in my chest. The clicking sounds grew louder and more frenzied as the creature pursued me relentlessly. I navigated the labyrinthine passages, desperately trying to stay one step ahead of the horrifying creature that hunted me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I frantically searched for an exit, all the while evading the creature's relentless pursuit. I could hear it getting closer and closer, its rapid movement echoing through the tunnels. My flashlight flickered, threatening to extinguish and leave me in complete darkness. Cornered in a dead-end tunnel, I knew I had to confront the creature. My heart raced as I searched for anything that could help me escape this nightmare. I noticed a rusted metal pipe on the ground and grasped it tightly, knowing it might be my only chance for survival. As the creature lunged towards me, I swung the pipe with all my strength, connecting with its gaunt body. The creature let out a pained screech and stumbled back, momentarily disoriented. Seizing the opportunity, I sprinted past the creature, making a break for the exit. My legs burned and my lungs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. I could still hear the creature's clicking sounds, now more distant but no less terrifying. I raced through the tunnels, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls as I tried to retrace my steps. Finally, I spotted the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the entrance. Relief washed over me as I burst out of the subway station, leaving the darkness and the creature behind. I didn't stop running until I was far from that dreadful place, my heart pounding as the adrenaline coursed through my veins. The encounter with the creature had left me traumatized, and I vowed never to venture into such a dangerous place again. As I sat in the safety of my apartment, reflecting on my harrowing experience, I realized that some mysteries are best left undiscovered. The abandoned subway station would forever remain a chilling reminder of the unknown horrors that lurk in the shadows. I found myself stranded in the unforgiving wilderness of northern Canada, my car rendered useless by the relentless snowstorm. The situation seemed dire as the snow piled up around me, making it impossible to continue driving. I knew I had to find shelter soon or risk succumbing to the extreme cold and become a frozen victim of the harsh Canadian winter. I left my car behind, trudging through the knee-deep snow. The wind cut through my clothing like a knife, and the heavy snowfall made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in front of me. My body shivered violently, and I questioned if I would even make it out of this alive. Stumbling through the white landscape, I eventually discovered an abandoned cabin nestled between the trees. It seemed like a miracle, and I hurried inside, relieved to escape the biting wind. The wooden door creaked loudly as I opened it, and I entered the small, dark space, my heart pounding with gratitude for the temporary refuge. The cabin was small and dark, but it provided me with the refuge I desperately needed. I quickly closed the door behind me, shutting out the howling wind and the relentless snowfall. As night fell, the storm outside grew even more ferocious, the wind howling like a pack of wolves, and the snow creating an impenetrable wall of white. I huddled in a corner, my arms wrapped tightly around myself, trying to preserve what little warmth I had. The cabin offered minimal protection, but it was better than being exposed to the elements outside. My thoughts raced, wondering how I would survive the night and find help. That's when I heard it. Strange noises outside the cabin, barely audible above the raging storm. It sounded like something was moving, scratching at the walls. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, and a creeping sense of dread washed over me. Was I truly alone out here? Or was there something else with me in this frozen wilderness? Ignoring the fear that screamed at me to stay put, I decided to investigate the sounds. I took a deep breath and mustered the courage to step back out into the storm, my vision obscured by the swirling snow. As I circled the cabin, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. Mysterious tracks in the snow, unlike any I had ever seen before. In that moment, I knew I had to find out what had left those tracks. Driven by a mix of curiosity and fear, I followed the trail deeper into the dark, snow-covered forest. The wind howled around me and my body ached from the cold, but I continued on, my determination unwavering. I felt as though I was being drawn to something, unable to resist the pull of the unknown. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the tracks became more pronounced. They were unlike any animal tracks I had ever seen, and the sheer size of them filled me with both awe and terror. The storm raged on, but I couldn't tear myself away from the mysterious trail. The further I followed the tracks, the more uneasy I became. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, a chilling sensation that sent shivers down my spine. The howling wind seemed to carry whispers, echoing through the trees and playing tricks on my mind. It was then that I saw it, a dark silhouette in the distance. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to make sense of the figure. As I cautiously approached, I realized that this was the creature responsible for the tracks. The creature. My body trembled with fear as I took in the sight of the horrifying creature. It stood tall, its body a twisted combination of rotting flesh and deer-like features. Its antlers loomed above its skull-like face, and its glowing eyes seemed to pierce my very soul. I knew I should have run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I was frozen in place, my heart pounding in my ears. The creature stared at me for what felt like an eternity, its gaze filled with an unspeakable hunger. Suddenly, the creature let out an ear-piercing shriek that jolted me back to my senses. I turned and ran, my legs finally responding to my primal urge to escape. I could hear the creature's footsteps behind me, the sound of crunching snow and snapping branches echoing through the forest. My lungs burned from the cold air and my legs ached from exertion, but I couldn't stop. I knew that if I slowed down for even a moment, the creature would have me in its grasp. As I sprinted through the trees, I caught a glimpse of the cabin through the swirling snow. I mustered every ounce of strength I had left and raced towards it, desperately hoping to reach safety before the creature could catch up to me. I burst through the cabin door, slamming it shut behind me and fumbling to lock it. My entire body shook with adrenaline as I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. The creature's haunting shriek echoed through the night, making it clear that it was still out there, stalking me. I knew that I needed to do something to protect myself. I quickly scanned the cabin, searching for anything that could be used as a weapon or a barricade. I grabbed a heavy wooden chair and wedged it under the door handle, hoping it would be enough to keep the creature at bay. As I moved through the cabin, I stumbled upon a rusted hunting knife. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I clutched it tightly in my hand, my knuckles turning white as I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. The creature's haunting cries continued to pierce the night, growing closer and closer to the cabin. I could hear its massive body moving outside, circling the cabin as it searched for a way in. The walls creaked under the weight of the creature's relentless assault, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it broke through. As dawn approached, the storm outside finally began to subside. The once deafening howl of the wind slowly faded to a whisper, and the snowfall lessened. The creature's cries grew more desperate, its hunger driving it to near madness. I held my breath as the creature slammed against the cabin door one final time, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the small space. But the door held, and the creature let out a frustrated howl as it retreated back into the forest. Exhausted but alive, I knew that I needed to leave the cabin and find my way back to civilization. The storm had passed, but the haunting memory of my encounter with the creature would remain with me forever. With a heavy heart, I stepped out into the cold morning air, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As I left the cabin, I took one last look at the shattered remains of the wooden chair that had saved my life. I knew that I had been given a second chance, and I was determined not to waste it. I set off into the forest, following the path I had taken earlier to retrace my steps back to my car. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting a warm, golden glow on the snow-covered ground. The forest seemed almost peaceful now, a stark contrast to the terror I had experienced the night before. As I walked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the beauty of nature, despite the horrors it could also hold. The journey back to my car was a long and arduous one, my body still weak from the previous night's ordeal. Every step felt like a challenge, but I refused to give up. I knew that I had to keep moving, both to escape the lingering threat of the creature and to find help. As I finally reached my car, relief washed over me. The sight of the snow-covered vehicle felt like a beacon of hope, a symbol of my return to the world I had left behind. I brushed off the snow and climbed inside, grateful for the temporary shelter it provided. With my last remaining energy, I managed to dig out my car from the snow and start the engine. The heat slowly began to seep through the vents, and I felt my frozen limbs begin to thaw. As I pulled away from the treacherous forest, I knew that my life would never be the same. I would never forget my encounter with the creature or the chilling fear it had instilled in me. The experience had changed me, forcing me to confront the darkest parts of the world and of myself. I had survived, but the haunting memory of the creature would remain with me, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. And though I would eventually return to the life I had known before, the mark left by the creature would never fade. The creature had become a part of me, a symbol of the unknown, the terrifying, and the mysterious. And as I drove away from the forest that had nearly claimed my life, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the world had yet to reveal. I've always been drawn to the wild and being outside. As a kid, I always wanted to be in the woods behind my house. The older I got, the more time I spent out there exploring. Now, at the age of 30, I can pretty much say that I've spent half of my life in the wild. It's not unusual for me to pack up a few things and head out for a few days at a time without much more than a sleeping bag, a fishing pole, and a knife. I don't need much to feel at home in the woods. I'm happy to just curl up next to a log, start a small fire, and call it a night. I've done that since I was old enough to get away with it without my mom having a fit. My nickname was Mowgli as a kid because you'd think I was raised by wolves. Anyway, Last summer, I went on a trip to my buddy's cabin in northern Michigan. There were about 6 of us who went up there. I decided to take a hike down a deer trail to this area I wanted to explore. I wanted to stay the night there and check it out in the morning. I was a couple of miles out when a storm set in. It had already started getting dark, so with the storm, it was too dark to see much. At that point, I figured that the quickest shelter would be these caves I knew about maybe a half mile from where I was. It was already almost 9 p.m. when I made the decision to head there. I took the turn off the trail that led to the caves and started to make my way down. But while I was walking, I got the feeling that I was being followed. It was a strange feeling that just came over me all of a sudden. I decided to take my .357 out of my holster, just in case I needed to defend myself. I kept on the trail to the caves and hoped I wasn't being stalked. But I got there just fine and settled in for the night. I must have dozed off because before I knew it, several hours had passed and I was dreaming that someone was yelling at me to wake up. I was disoriented and not sure if it was part of my dream or if someone was actually trying to wake me up. I realized I was drenched in sweat and feeling uneasy. I grabbed my gun and flashlight and shone the light around outside. I couldn't make out anything in the darkness, but I thought I could hear something moving around not that far away. I was thinking it might be wolves. I decided I just wanted to get out of there since the storm was gone. I knew a back way out of the caves and I figured I would cut through the woods and get back to camp. I was on high alert, listening for any sign of anything approaching me. Regardless of me trying to stay focused, I got turned around at some point because after a bit, I found myself back near the caves again. I could see the entrance, but here's where it got bizarre. I saw a figure near the entrance that appeared to be something wolf-like, but was about 3 times the size of your average wolf. Not to mention it was standing upright. From what I could see, it had a real unnatural, bulky build. The shoulders on that thing were so wide and its back seemed humped. I couldn't see its face very well, but it had its snout up in the air like maybe it was smelling the air. I was afraid that it had caught a scent of me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I watched it moving its head back and forth, and I could swear I could hear it growling deep in its throat. I stayed quiet and managed to get on the right trail and headed in the right direction out of there. When I reached the trail crossing where I had picked up the deer track, I heard a howl unlike anything I've ever heard. It didn't sound like a wolf. It was terrifying. I felt like I had gotten away from the caves just in time. I was sure if that thing had seen me, I would have been in serious danger. I made it back to camp, and next morning when I told everybody what I saw, nobody believed me and were laughing that the famous Mowgli got scared out of the woods. So I said, fine, we'll all go to the caves and look for the tracks. So after breakfast, we headed over there. We all had our rifles, so I felt okay about going back. When we got near the mouth of the cave, I made everybody stand back so if there were prints, they wouldn't be accidentally disturbed. My friend Nick was a pretty experienced tracker in our group, so he went and looked. He almost immediately had a shocked reaction. He waved us forward and there were unmistakable tracks. The ground was still damp from the last night's rain. It was crazy. It was hard to miss what looked like 6-inch wide dog tracks. And the length was like 1.5 times my shoe. Wolves and coyotes have nowhere near that big of paws. The tracks were all around the outside of the cave but didn't seem to go in. The cave entrance was really narrow, so I don't know if that creature would even have fit through. Well, no one was laughing then. Nick said he had no desire to try to follow tracks like that and would rather not know who they belonged to. We all felt the same way. We all just wanted to get out of there. We went back to the cabin and didn't venture far from it for the rest of the trip. I had been around those caves before and never came across anything but local wildlife. So I don't know if that thing was new to those woods, and if so, what had drawn it there? Last year, I was working in a warehouse that my dad bought in Pennsylvania. It was in a remote location with no neighbors within a half mile, and all you could see around there were cornfields. My dad got it for about half of what it was worth. The guy who was getting rid of it seemed really stoked when my dad signed the papers, which probably should have been a warning. The warehouse was huge, but the remote location had its drawbacks. One of the biggest challenges was the lack of cell service in the area, which made it hard to coordinate with suppliers or customers. Anyway, we made it work with a landline. I usually worked alone. My main job was to restore the front office area so it could be more efficient and functional. In order to reach the front office, you had to pass through a hallway connecting the main warehouse to another office space, and then proceed through yet another door to get to the front. From the first day I started working there, Elle was always hearing these weird thumps and banging noises. But the thing that always made me feel especially weird was that the door locks were backwards. It was like they were designed to keep something confined inside the building rather than keeping people out. I was in the front office one day when I started to hear the loudest thumping I had heard so far. At first, I tried to ignore it and kept putting painter's tape around the door in front of me. But when I heard a screeching sound on top of the thumping, I couldn't ignore it anymore. My heart started racing and I was wishing that I could just have one day of freaking peace to do my work in. I couldn't imagine what it could be. I assumed it had to an animal of some sort that had found its way inside. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing to worry about. But my nervousness only got worse when I heard the violent slam of the secondary office door. I peeked around the corner and saw that the door was closed. Even though I knew there was no draft strong enough to make the door close so violently, I tried to pretend that's what happened. But I knew something strange was happening. I couldn't shake the feeling of creepiness that had settled in my gut, and I knew I needed to investigate to figure out what was going on. The thumping noise got closer and my heart was really pounding. I couldn't tell how close the noise was, but it sounded like it was right on the other side of the door. I couldn't move. My eyes were focused on the door handle, and I watched it slowly start to turn. The door opened, and I could feel myself just wanting to run. The door swung wider and wider until it was fully open. But there was nothing there. No visible movement, no air movement, just creepy silence. The silence was that deafening kind that you can actually hear. It was like the quiet had a presence of its own, and it was suffocating me. Then there was this ungodly screech. It totally sounded human, and it sounded like it was coming from the main warehouse. The pain and anger in that scream was just chilling. Without thinking, I turned and ran out of the front office. I needed to get as far away as possible from whatever was happening in the warehouse. I got in my car and drove until I had cell service to call my dad. Even though he sounded skeptical about all the door-closing weirdness, he did acknowledge that something strange was going on with the building. He said he would come and check it out, and we agreed to meet up at the site. About half an hour later, my dad and I arrived at the warehouse. I showed him the door that had slammed shut earlier, pointing out how it was separate from both the front office and the main warehouse. It was clear that no draft could have made it close. I reminded him that there was no logical reason for all the thumping noises and the screeching noises that had been going on. He agreed to investigate the main warehouse with me. With my dad by my side, I felt brave enough to lead the way into the warehouse. The building used to be a furniture manufacturing facility, and they made handcrafted tables, chairs, and other furniture items, which meant that the floor had a thick coat of dust on it. We stepped inside the warehouse and nothing seemed out of place. The dust on the floor wasn't disturbed, the doors were closed, and the windows were all locked. The only thing that caught our attention was one of the fluorescent light fixtures was hanging down and swaying a little. My dad got a ladder and held it steady while I climbed up to inspect the light. As I looked on top of the light, I saw something that just gave me chills. It was a large, fresh human handprint. There were no footprints in the dust around the light, nothing at all. I climbed down and switched places with my dad. He saw it and said, "That's not possible. There's been no one in here for months." And then, like it wanted to make its presence known, The thumping noise returned. But this time it was different. It felt like an earthquake shaking the whole building. That was followed up by that horrible screech. It felt like it was coming right out of the walls. We ran out of there, and I have not returned to that building since. My dad had to hire someone else to finish my work. The new employee reported hearing the thumping noise, but so far, no other strange events have occurred. I might never know what actually happened there, but there's no doubt in my mind that there's a paranormal presence in that building, and the previous owner was fully aware of it. The memory of the sound of that lock turning on its own and the feeling of being surrounded by that oppressive presence will stay with me forever. This was a couple years ago when I had gone to hang out at my best friend's house. We lived in a small town in northern Wisconsin. My friend had just started driving, but her mom had already grounded her from her car for not following some rule. So we were really bored and there wasn't anything we felt like doing, so we decided to walk to the small downtown area. The walk there was pretty long. We had to cross some dirt roads and follow a railroad track. By the time we got there, it was getting dark. It was the weekend and we thought we might run into someone we knew. We poked around a couple of the shops, but there was nothing interesting, so we went over to the little park. You know how it is when you're a teenager and everything just seems boring. We were swinging on the swings, and I spotted 2 sheriff police cars parked at the end of the downtown strip near this old mechanic shop. My friend thought they were probably searching for 2 guys who had been breaking into cars around town. We decided to start heading back since it was almost like 10 p.m. at that point, and I wasn't looking forward to the long walk back through the fields and railroad tracks in the dark. So we were walking past the mechanic's place, about to turn the corner, and I heard a helicopter. My friend thought it was a police helicopter looking for the car hoppers. I highly doubted they would go so far as to use a helicopter for a petty crime. But I started to feel worried that the police might mistake us for the car hoppers they were looking for. We were walking across the street from the sheriff cars, and I tried not to act suspicious even though we hadn't done anything wrong. We rounded the corner and we came to the huge grassy field behind the downtown strip. At the end of the field, there are these dense woods, and it was at the boundary of the field and the woods that we saw something bizarre. It was like a massive rod-like object that was hanging there in midair. It was hovering just above the tree line. It's kind of hard to describe it accurately, but it was like 2 rods stacked on top of each other, with the upper one slightly extending to the right and the lower one to the left. Both ends had these green lights that were glowing and pulsing. Maybe it was because it was so dark, but the glowing seemed like it spread over a really large area. The object was enormous, and its shape seemed incompatible for an airborne object. I was completely bewildered by the scene in front of me. I could still hear the sound of a helicopter, but I didn't see any sign of one. Instead, I found myself staring at this impossible object suspended in midair. My friend, who I knew wasn't really a believer in UFOs or aliens, was still insisting that it was some kind of police aircraft looking for the car hoppers, which in my mind sounded more gullible than believing in UFOs, for God's sake. I mean, if we had aircraft like that, I'm pretty sure it would be top secret and not hanging out in a field. It was definitely not a plane. Its shape was just a rod, without wings or propellers. The fact that it was so huge and was able to stay suspended in midair was inexplicable. And it was positioned at an odd angle. I remember the next part clearly. I lifted my phone up to take a picture, and the object suddenly started spinning toward us. It was totally surreal. It spun really fast, like it was a propeller itself. You could hear the sound of the wind as it was cutting through the air. I was completely stunned. My mind was struggling to make sense of what was happening. It was like the object was responding to my phone. My friend started panicking and pushed my hands down. Then the spinning motion immediately stopped, and the object began to reposition itself, lifting up a little and started to move toward downtown. I have to tell you, the helicopter sound hadn't been coming from the object. The helicopter we heard had appeared in front of the rod-shaped object, almost like it was escorting it away. The helicopter didn't look like a conventional one, though. Maybe it was because I was on the verge of hysteria, but it seemed to have a distorted shape and its windows were unusually large. The lights were on inside it, which I thought was really weird for a helicopter flying around in the dark. I can't emphasize enough how unsettling the whole situation was. The object and the helicopter were hovering right above us, and it felt like we were in the middle of something that could be catastrophic. The sound of the helicopter blades was deafening, and the size of the object was mind-boggling. My friend kept trying to rationalize it as some sort of police aircraft, but I knew deep down that it was not of this world. The way it moved, the lights, the sound, everything about it was just so strange and otherworldly. When you see something that doesn't fit into any category, it's like your brain just can't process it. My brain didn't know what to do with this information, and it was incredibly unnerving. It was like everything I thought I knew about the world was being questioned. But all we could do after all that was to just walk away. I looked back a few times, but then we both just wanted to get home as quickly as possible. It's strange to think that I used to think a close encounter would be cool. But after that experience, I don't ever want to go through something like that again. I used to work security in a museum in the southwestern part of the United States. The basement of the place was almost always locked because there was a lot of valuable stuff kept down there. Whenever someone needed to go down to retrieve something, the rules stated that they had to be accompanied by at least one person from security. This was due to some vague story about an incident which had occurred down there years before. No one seemed to know exactly what that incident was, but we all assumed it was related to an attempted theft or something. Anyway, some repair work needed to be done in the basement, so some contractors were brought in. Me and another security guard were given the job of staying down there with these 4 workers for security reasons. The job was supposed to last 2 weeks, and I swear, every day something odd would happen. I mean, in the first place, it just felt unexplainably creepy down there. I personally didn't have any reason to feel weird about the place, but somehow being down there for any length of time made my skin crawl. I felt like someone's eyes were on me, and I was always just really anxious. There always seemed to be work tools missing when we would go down there at the beginning of the day. There were these weird drafts coming in and strange metallic smells. There weren't any windows down there, but there was one area toward the back that seemed unfinished. Kind of like a crawl space that went under a portion of the building. As far as I knew, it didn't lead to the outside in any way, so it didn't seem to make sense that we would feel those drafts sometimes. It wasn't always, but when it happened, it did seem to go along with the metallic odor. The contractors themselves also seemed freaked out by being down there. It was like they just wanted to get the job done, and it seemed unusually quiet down there every day. It wasn't like they would joke back and forth like you would expect among a group of guys who worked together all the time. They just did what they had to do as quickly as possible. Anyway, sometime during the second week, my security colleague, who was usually down there with me every day, called in sick to work. So it was just me and the contractors. Everything was pretty much as usual, except it had maybe been extra drafty that day. At one point, I went off to use the bathroom. A few minutes after I had gone in the bathroom, I started to hear screams coming from the hallway. I rushed out as fast as I could, and I saw 3 of the guys hauling ass up the basement stairs. They looked petrified. I ran after them, and when we were upstairs, I asked what had happened. They said their other colleague, the 4th guy, had walked toward the back of the basement out of sight and had started screaming. They went to look for him and couldn't find him. They said they were freaking out about how he could just be gone, and they heard a loud screeching noise like some giant eagle or something, and then something scraping along the cement floor toward them. Apparently, they had all lost their shit at once and turned around and ran. Some of the random weird basement stories I'd heard before started coming back to me. I'd never paid much attention to them before. Maybe the fact that no one was allowed to go down there without security had a deeper reason. I called for help and managed to get 2 people to go with me to locate the last contractor. Right when we got down there and headed toward the back area, we were hit with this horrific smell. It was that metallic scent, but now it was mixed with a rotten sulfur smell. When we went past this pillar right at the back of the basement, we finally noticed the worker guy leaning against it, facing away from us. He looked like he was staring at something, and then we looked toward the back and saw this thing maybe 6 to 7 feet tall standing on 2 legs that was just unfathomable. It seemed partly human and partly giant lizard. Dinosaur-like. It had these piercing yellow eyes, and I could see the black claws on the hands it held in front of itself. Its head was like a lizard, and it was staring at us with an aggressive look. The worker was staring back at it like he was paralyzed. He didn't seem to be all there. He was glassy-eyed and mostly non-responsive. I yelled, "Run!" and I grabbed his arm and half-dragged him behind me, and we all took off screaming toward the stairs. I don't even know if that thing followed us. We managed to make it up and slammed the door, and I locked it. When I looked at the guy, I realized that the back of his jacket had been torn, like slashed, and shredded, like something had clawed at him. There was some blood too, so it broke the skin. We ended up calling an ambulance and sending him to the hospital. The police came too and evacuated the building and police taped the whole area. We all gave statements and were sent home and told not to come back to work until we were notified. Well, guess what? After about 2 weeks, we heard that our jobs were no longer available, and we were given some severance pay, and I ended up going back to my hometown in Illinois to regroup. To this day, I still don't know what the freak was going on there. When I've tried to describe that day to people, it sounds like I've lost my mind or something. I just tried to let the whole thing go and move on. I'll be the first to admit that I wasn't the most career-driven person. I wasn't anything less than a slack-off growing up, and it's kind of a wonder I even graduated high school. But after that, it's not like I had a promising career in my future. I was looking at a life spent removing pests from suburban houses or risking my life to put out fires. And, knowing my track record, I probably wouldn't have been good at either. I had a good couple of friends though, and one of them was generous enough to offer me a job as a traveling salesman working for their uncle's company. It seemed like the only option as a deadbeat 22-year-old who'd been fired from their last 2 gigs. I happily accepted and mentally decided it was time for a change. So I started up with the job, traveling to small neighboring towns in my beat-up VW for the first few months. I was making a modest living, and it felt good to complete a job well done. I was eventually told I had to go on the road for a 3-town trip, so I'd have to find a place to stay for a night. This job was anything but glamorous, and the lodging was up to me to figure out. With the limited means I had available, I was lucky to have even found the place I did. The Crampton Lodge. The Crampton Lodge was not a lodge at all, but a 1-story, battered and beaten motel with an interminably lit vacancy sign. It was the only establishment I'd seen for miles, and having already hit 2 stops that day, I was tired and getting ready to sleep in the car. The motel lobby was dirty-looking and poorly lit. There was no one behind the desk, so I tapped my hand on the dinky little bell. An old, sleepy-looking man emerged from the back office with an unfriendly expression on his face. He almost wordlessly checked me into room number 4 and handed me the key. I offered a smile, but he was already shutting himself into the back office before I could do so. Room number 4 was expectedly unwelcoming. There was a dingy queen bed and a small, super old-school TV on top of a scuffed dresser. The bathroom was a horrible green tile from floor to ceiling. It made me dizzy. I turned on the TV to block out whatever sounds might carry over from the other rooms. The connection was pretty shabby, but I finally settled on some old black and white movie. I took a shower, but I felt grosser than I had before. Everything about this place was just off. I just wanted to fall asleep, wake up, and leave. But when I walked back into the bedroom, the TV station had changed. It was an entirely black screen with a perfectly defined graphic of a white square in the middle, growing and shrinking rhythmically. The picture quality was too good for the TV. I was puzzled. I tried to change the channel, but to no avail. When I pressed the power button on the remote, still nothing, and nothing even when I unplugged the TV from the wall. The screen just kept glowing back at me, that white square taunting me, growing and shrinking as it did. I was honestly pretty freaked out, and I was going to march right up to that grumpy old man at the front desk and demand a different room. But when I touched the handle of the door, I winced. It was hot, like there was a fire outside. I glimpsed out through the dinky blinds covering the window. No fire. But when I tried my hand on the door again, the heat was unbearable. I groaned. This was definitely the worst place on earth for a traveler. I saw movement through the gaps in the blinds. If I could get that person's attention, maybe they could help me out. I ducked my head around and under the blinds. There was someone out there, all right, but it didn't look like they wanted to help me. Their face was remarkably smooth and pale as a ghost white, actually, as white as a piece of paper. Just inches from the glass of the window pane, this face stared expressionless and straight into me. It was hard to take in. They were completely bald, including their eyebrows. There were zero signs of aging whatsoever on their face, just white, stretched skin wrapped tightly around bone and tissue. The lips were a cold, bitter red like blood in the snow. I stared into their black eyeballs with a dry mouth. Had they been waiting for me? Where had they come from? They weren't standing there the first time I looked out, just seconds before. I watched as the figure reached a ghastly white hand up in front of their face. I don't know how or why, but I couldn't stop myself. I mirrored them with my hand, following in a trance as both of our palms pressed flatly together, separated only by the glass of the window. When we did this, I felt a surge of either blistering heat or blackening cold shoot up through my arm, sending me staggering backward. At the same time, the power in my room shut off, including the picture on the television. I sat on the ground, panting and terrified for what felt like hours. I was too scared to get up, to look out the window. When the doorknob rattled and began to turn, I felt my heart drop to the bottom of my stomach. I gulped. But it was just the grumpy old man from the front desk. He had switched a fuse and the power would be back on shortly. I nodded, still in disbelief. I woke up the next morning in that same spot. I'd fallen asleep there. But when I saw that fresh light of morning, I had never been so relieved. I wasted no time in vacating that room, ready for the day of work, determined to do whatever it took to never wind up in a place like that again. I've lived in Jersey my whole life. My parents lived in Jersey their whole lives, and so did their parents, and so on. I hated living in Jersey. I knew we were always close to New York City, but my parents were never keen on a day trip. As a matter of fact, they staunchly refused to take me or any of my 6 siblings. I never understood it. We lived in Pinelands, and that pretty much describes the place to a T. We lived just on the outskirts of a gigantic nature reserve. Just over 1 million acres of forest. Our lives weren't very comfortable, something you'd probably expect from a long line of Pinelands apologists. My father worked in lumber and Mom raised the 7 of us. There was only one real rule she made us follow. Don't wander into the woods after dark. Like most things, none of us questioned our parents on this. It seemed like a pretty reasonable request. Just over 8 years old, Scout was the youngest of the bunch and the definition of a troublemaker. Clumsy, yes, but ambitious. Naive, but wise beyond their years. It's hard to describe how special Scout was. There was this interminable spark lit inside of them. That spark of childhood, of joy, of unending possibilities. We were play fighting after dinner a few weeks before Scout's 9th birthday. My mom was overwhelmed with housework and things were just as chaotic as usual. We began playing an innocent game of tag. The last time I saw them, Scout was running out the kitchen door, laughing and smiling. I had been just a few feet behind them in my pursuit. I was it, after all. But as soon as Scout's head disappeared out the door and into that foreboding darkness of nighttime, something stopped me in my tracks. I stood still for a few minutes before telling Mom. A few minutes too late. I guess there really is such a thing as a mother's intuition. Mom knew immediately that Scout would have run into the woods. That's where we played in the daylight and threatened to do after dark. And it seemed my mother also knew that Scout would never be seen again. She was right. By morning, Scout was officially listed as a missing person. My father revealed nothing of how he truly felt. He began working longer nights and we rarely saw him. My mother didn't have that choice. She had 6 children relying on her, and as transformative of an experience as losing a child is, she had to keep herself together so that she could keep all of us together. So while the rest of my siblings marched on in life with Mom leading them and Dad completely withdrawn, I fell somewhere in the middle. There was no way around the truth. I was partially responsible for Scout's disappearance. I knew it, and I think the rest of the family did too. On the anniversary of Scout's disappearance, the house was so cold, literally and figuratively. We had lost this undeniable warmth, and it was all my fault, and Dad was a mess and Mom was a soldier who didn't deserve any of it. The police didn't find any trace of Scout. Figures. Families like mine weren't exactly priority number 1 when it came to missing persons. I knew that if anyone could find Scout, it would be me. So I didn't head home at sunset like I usually would. We loved these woods in the daytime, and that was when we explored them. But according to Mom, the woods were no place for children at nighttime. Or maybe she was implying something darker. I didn't care. I was 11 and a half. I could make my own grown-up rules. But that confidence didn't last long. I was a decent way from home, but I was no deeper than usual. For some reason, though, as soon as the sun disappeared and I was out there alone in the dusk, I felt miles away from anything I'd ever known. The pines take on a cloak of darkness at that hour. The trees insulate the land, and as the light disappears by the second, the forest transforms into some slow whirring refrigerator. It comes alive with insects and creatures too shy to come out in the light of day. I felt a chill touch my feet before moving up my body. It dawned on me that I was not alone. The darkening pines chirped with life from every branch. For some reason, I was comforted by that revelation. Insects were tangible beings that Scout and I would collect in jars and show off to our older siblings and our folks. We pointed at pictures of them in the battered old encyclopedias Dad would bring home from garage sales. But then I heard a crunch in the distance. No insect or woodland creature. It was like some giant foot pressing into the earth. But something I knew. Let me remind you that I was a child. I set off in the direction of the noise. I applied that fondness for the insects to the unknown being in the woods. As I tell this story now, one saying keeps circling in my head. And curiosity killed the cat. And boy, was I a curious little thing. My feet flew across the forest floor in hot pursuit of whatever magical, surely harmless forest creature I was about to discover. Maybe they'd name the species after me. That was what happened when we played pretend. The atmosphere grew rapidly darker. With just the faint moonlight poking through the treetops, I kept my eager eyes on the ground ahead, dodging fallen tree trunks and scattered bramble. I barely noticed the smell at first, but then it engulfed me. It was that awful, retching, stinking odor that we goofed about on long drives, where we'd pass a stretch of road and would suddenly erupt in fits of immature laughter, comparing the stench to my eldest sibling's flatulence. Sulfur. That's what it was. I guess I took it as a sign that I was moving in the right direction. Maybe I didn't have a choice. Because when I finally looked up, so deep now in the black wilderness, I'm sure that something forcibly directed my gaze at the giant in front of me. It was like a monster from a scary book, but not any that Dad would have brought home. It was double, maybe triple, my size. Its body looked almost like a horse, but the creature was standing on 2 legs. On either side of its scaly chest was a large, bat-like wing that spanned the length of its body. Its eyes were glowing red, piercing into mine. That one moment felt like an eternity. I was positively frozen in fear. I watched in horror as the thing opened its wide, dripping mouth, releasing a roaring screech that literally blew wind in my face. It looked like it was about to pounce. No, it was. I knew it then and I know it now. And I don't know what compelled me to do this. I said something that stopped it. Scout. The creature seemed to recognize that name, my voice, my face. I don't know. In a split second, a softness crossed its features. It was so distinctively familial, childlike, curious. I still cannot come to terms with it. I know it sounds crazy, but I think I saw Scout, but only for a flash. Because then the thing flapped its wings with such force that this time the wind knocked me down. I sat there shaking, watching in awe as this thing flapped off into the darkness deeper into the woods. I scared the hell out of my parents. When I got home, they were spitting mad, but I could understand why. I don't know what happened that night, or what I saw, but maybe the woods really are a bad place for a child to wander at night.